Now you've got this 3 wide receiver room. You've got this whole plan. Let's see something more dynamic here. I'm team draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds every year. There's always a risk when you pay top of market money for a quote unquote non-premier position. He's not consistent. That's a problem. If he's healthy, I think he would probably win the top spot. I fully expect him to grab one of these defensive tackles in the first round. I think Christian Fulton is potentially the most important signing on the defense in the offseason. It can kick Trent McDuffie inside. That allows you to have a domino effect here on the entire defense.
So in today's video, I have an awesome conversation with Seth Kaiser about the state of the roster heading into the draft, and as blunt and honest as this can be, I think this conversation will leave you pretty encouraged about 2025. So let's get into it. But first, how about those? All right, Seth, there's been some movement on the offensive line. They surprisingly, at the time, franchise tagged Trey Smith, and then maybe even more surprisingly, even though I could understand why, they traded away Joe Thuney to alleviate his cap hit. So you're saying, hey, Trey Smith is in theory the guy of the future. Joe Thuney sadly gone. They then brought in Jalen Moore on a 2-year deal, formerly the backup 49er for Trent Williams. Let me know your thoughts on the O-line and how are you feeling about it currently, even before the draft, with them maybe adding a little bit more there?
Sure. It's pretty clear that Veach and Reed agree that left tackle was completely untenable as it was, and they're not willing to try to shuffle through kind of the same process that they used for 2024, which makes sense given how that went, right? Their process 2024, let's draft a guy with upside. Kingsley Suamataia was a pretty highly praised draft pick at the time. And, the idea is we can develop him, we can do this, we can do that. And that went the way it went. And they could have done the Band-Aid thing. They could have signed Donovan Smith. They could have brought back DJ Humphries. And instead, they're kind of trying to almost have their cake and eat it too by grabbing someone that's more of a known quantity than a rookie by a wide margin. Jalen Moore's been a backup while he's been in the league, but he's started, I think it's about 11 or 12 games. And he started at least 2 games every year in the league, including multiple consecutive games. I think it was 4 in a row he started, and then he had 1 more game. He had extensive playing time this last year. So he's a lot more of a known quantity, but he's also a guy with maybe a little more upside too. So they're kind of trying to find a hack in the system there a little bit. They clearly believe, based on what they're doing, that the way they've got the offensive line built, or the way they had it built from last year, kind of inside out, might not necessarily be tenable if you have a hole at left tackle. They've seen you can't have, and that's the thing with offensive line play. You can't get away with a really, really, really subpar performer at left tackle, really at right tackle either. You can get away with it a little more on the interior because there's a lot more stuff you can do in terms of double team and scheme and sending help and that sort of stuff. I think they saw that really was, when you look at the rest of what they've done this offseason, in a weird way, it's kind of running back the 2024 plan, hoping to execute it a little better with maybe what they view as more of a sure thing in Moore. And Moore, it's an interesting signing in that respect. He said it himself during his kind of introduction to Chiefs Kingdom. He said, the film doesn't lie. I know it's a small sample size, but check out my film. And that's what I did. I checked out his film. The film's solid. It's better than, certainly way better than what they had last year at left tackle. And I would argue it's better, particularly in pass protection, than what they had in 2023 as well. And that's really what you're going for. If you can get above average play at left tackle at the price they got there, that's a huge win, and the offensive line will be better unless Kingsley Suamataia is a complete bust at left guard. Even then, changing that problem spot from left tackle to left guard is more manageable when you've got Creed Humphrey there and with the entire way that the offense is run. So I see the vision there, and what they're basically counting on is traits for Suamataia will help him succeed at guard because he won't be as exposed as he was at tackle. So I see the plan. It's a plan with they're trying to protect themselves from that floor. Because, we've talked about this before. With every plan, you've got a floor and a ceiling. Every player, you've got a floor and a ceiling. Last year, they hit the floor with the left tackle spot, and it helped drag the entire offense down. So they're kind of trying to have their cake and eat it too in raising the ceiling of the line, but also trying to protect against that floor.
Speaking of protecting the floor, the ceiling, it seems like Trey Smith is the guy that they're going to keep at least to help have a decently high floor, and I don't even think he's hit his ceiling yet at right guard, which is great. They got him on the tag. It's trending in the direction of him getting a long-term deal done. Do you feel like that's the direction headed, and does that make sense to you in the sense of like probably can't afford to lose both Trey Smith and Joe Thuney in the course of a couple of off seasons?
Oh, absolutely. Losing Thuney. So when I wrote about what I would do if I were Veach, I went a separate direction. Thuney is the superior pass protector as of now. He's also young enough that I think he's got, for in guard years, being in your almost mid-30s isn't that old. I personally would have thought about extending him and seeing if Trey wanted to go somewhere. I think what they're betting on is the significantly younger player who's gotten better every year he's in the league. Particularly in pass protection, he's really worked on his technique to avoid getting caught lunging and that kind of stuff. You're betting on the ascending player, the younger player, the guy that you think hasn't maxed out yet, and you're also not worried about, hitting that drop off all of a sudden and falling off. Paying guards top of the market money is tricky. It's tricky business, especially when you're paying Juwan Taylor what you're paying him. There's always a risk when you pay top of market money for a quote unquote non-premier position. I'm of the opinion that you can do that, but they better be elite or close to it. So like Creed Humphrey is a no-brainer, probably the best center in the NFL. Trey is a really good guard. That makes it a little more of a question mark to me, but I think they're betting on the ascension. And like you said, once they parted ways with Thuney, it's kind of like losing both would have been really, really tough. Now they're hoping to, I think, layer it. If Kingsley Suamataia can be an average guard, which his athletic profile for a guard in terms of size, length, athleticism is off the charts. If he can just be an average guard, you walk away with a better line all the way around. Is it necessarily how I would build, given how much guards cost? I don't know that it would be, but I understand why they're doing it the way they're doing it when they had to pick one. And as they almost always have, they went with the younger ascending player.
Before I get to the next segment, did you guys know that I have an NFL-wide news channel covering all things NFL outside of the Kansas City Chiefs? It's called Cole Breaks the Huddle, and I do a very poor job of letting you guys know that I run a second channel where we drop multiple videos a week covering big picture NFL news. So if you enjoy my style of content with the editing, the pacing, and all that, but want to hear it from an NFL-wide perspective, this is the channel for you. Link is in the description down below. Yeah, speaking of younger ascending players, I feel like a few of the people they brought in this year is around that 26, 27 Christian Fulton's 26, 27. Jalen Moore is about that age. Elijah Mitchell, the running back, is about that age. Hollywood Brown, 28, a little bit older, but they're bringing back key pieces that, if healthy, I feel really good about. So they brought back Juju. They brought back Hollywood. I really like the wide receiver room, especially if Rice and Hollywood stay healthy and maybe Rice's suspension isn't that long. How do you feel about the state of the offense as far as who they've brought back? And then if you want to kind of curtail that with your thoughts on the running back room, Kareem Hunt's back, Elijah Mitchell. We know he didn't play in 2024, but in theory, like what you see there. And then Pacheco is another year removed from his ankle injury.
Right. And with Pacheco, he didn't play as well last year as he's played previously. I think there's a lot to be said for coming back after getting hurt, and him maybe losing a little bit of explosiveness kind of accentuated some of the limitations that he's had as a player in terms of vision in particular. That was one thing that I know for people stood out a lot more watching him and Kareem Hunt, who has no explosion, but terrific vision, watching them kind of run side by side with the same line. You could see a little more some of those flaws. It's really tough to gauge running backs, to be perfectly honest, until you see, because they're so dependent on the offensive line. Then you see what they're doing. And when you see two guys side by side, you could see some of the issues there. Mitchell, I think, is an interesting swing. None of what they've done should, in my opinion, stop them from drafting a running back in a really good running back class in like the fourth-ish round, maybe even third-ish if someone falls that they think is incredible, because that could add another dynamic element to the offense. And what we've seen with this last year, we've seen the conversation, the pendulum always swings in conversations with the NFL. The running backs don't matter conversation kind of hit, maximum capacity. And now you see with, the Barkleys and the Henrys of the world, a running back can't carry an offense. A running back can make an already good offense even better. And that's where that amount of impact kind of got lost in the conversation for a lot of people. So that's where it's something they should at least be thinking about in terms of ways to get more explosive. And that's, Elijah Mitchell is an effort to do that. He's just struggled so much with injuries that it's tough to count on that. I like the signing. If he's healthy, I think he would probably win the top spot. But there's a big if there. So I still think you definitely go with running back. In terms of the wide receiver room, I see the plan. They had an idea for a transition year of Travis Kelce's no longer the number one guy. Rashee Rice is going to be the number one guy. We're going to bring in Hollywood Brown, who's a good fit. We're going to draft Xavier Worthy. And the idea is to have a faster offense. And honestly, because so many snaps ended up going to Juju Smith-Schuster because of the injury stuff, because so many snaps went to Justin Watson, who has downfield speed but is a slow burn, kind of similar to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, their offense looked painfully slow. DeAndre Hopkins, we're all grateful. He added quite the spark midseason, and I think by the end of the year, I think injuries were starting to slow him down. I think they were nagging at him a little bit. The offense looked painfully slow by the end. They obviously don't want that again. I think it looks like they're essentially trying to run back that plan. Say, hey, we had an idea, and then Brown got hurt right away, and then Rice got hurt basically right away, and then the left tackle position completely blew up, and then they were just triaging the rest of the year and managed to get by with an okay offense, a little above average, but still not what they want. I think the Chiefs understand they can't have that happen 3 years in a row. You can't have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback and Andy Reid as your head coach and have an average to above average offense 3 years in a row. Eventually, excuses run out. And so I'm less than enthused that they're running back the same plan because the health concerns, because of the suspension concerns. And then also to a lesser extent for me, the way that they utilized Hollywood Brown, like in the playoffs, it wasn't as dynamic attacking the intermediate portion of the field as I was hoping. On paper, you have an offense that you can attack all three levels of the field with Worthy, Brown, and Rice. But they need to show that they can actually layer the offense together like that. So if they brought back, to quote my colleague at KCSN, Maddie Lane, if they brought back Hollywood Brown to kind of do the same stuff they had him doing in the playoffs, I don't know as much about that. If they brought him back to be what the role he was in Arizona and what it looked like they were going to have him do during the regular season, then I'm all for it. I would still draft a receiver in the first 3 rounds, but I'm team draft a wide receiver in the first 3 rounds every year. Every single year, draft a guy, maybe even in the first 2 rounds, depending on what else your needs are. And because they did such a good job addressing glaring needs, I think they've got the option to do that.
They certainly seem to be going into the draft with the ability to go best player available in every single round. There's nothing dire that I see that they have to reach unnecessarily for. Not that they have 8 picks. I don't know that they'll use all 8, but I still think you've got 4 at least in the top 100. So you've got the ability to really get some playmakers, which is obviously the hope. I kind of agree with you. I do wonder how the offense will look like actually seeing Hollywood, Rice, and Worthy together. Because even with Hollywood back, he was still trying to get things just back up to speed, but then you had no Rice. So that's what I'm really intrigued to see about is just if their health holds up, obviously, yes, that's important. But then just seeing all of them together with Worthy also going into year 2. Love the idea. We'll see about some of the other wide receivers on the roster. Sky Moore's on the last year of his deal. Who knows about any of the others? Nico, with McCole going to the Packers, he could be your returner, but still depth piece on offense. You've got some of the other guys gone. I agree with you with, hey, if you could draft a receiver early-ish and then a running back, think of two of my favorite running backs in recent history for the Chiefs, Jamal Charles and Kareem Hunt early. They were both 3rd-round picks. And that you got absolute, I don't think you could necessarily find a Jamal Charles every year like that. That's a unicorn pick to me, but that's not a crazy reach on a running back. You're getting him 3rd round and absolutely electric difference makers, even Kareem early on in his NFL career.
Yep. And that's absolutely a route to go if you're looking to have the offense be more explosive. That's been a problem for them. Last year, they were a better offense than they were in 2023, but they still lacked explosion. That's one area where I do think a lot of good questions do exist for Andy Reid with year 2 of Xavier Worthy, because they kind of tried to use him in that wide receiver 1 role when Rice got hurt and he just wasn't ready for it. And so then they kind of went back to the original plan and slowly expanded what he did in the offense. And then it wasn't until like the second half of the Super Bowl where you're just like, probably could have been running some of these downfield routes sooner, right? Like, and in case people wrongly think this, it's not that last touchdown was against backups. Everything else before that was not. He was running away from Cooper DeJean across the middle of the field. Xavier Worthy can play. He wasn't necessarily ready for that bigger role, but now he really should be. And with Rice and with Brown, you want to see a more dynamic offense. And that's something, I mean, you'd maybe see one shot down the field a game down the stretch last year. And again, part of that, they had the absolute fiasco at left tackle. Okay. And it impacted everything they did the rest of the year. And then even once they put in Joe Thuney, I caught a lot of heat from Chiefs fans, and I usually am not one to pat myself on the back. I'm just kidding. I totally am. But I caught a lot of heat from Chiefs fans that were telling me that Joe Thuney was playing elite at left tackle. And I said, unfortunately, he's not. They're just getting rid of the ball in 2.5 seconds. And he's holding up as best he can, except if you're playing power rushers. And as soon as the Eagles made it to the Super Bowl, I had just had visions of Josh Sweat going right through Joe Thuney's chest. And that's what happened. And, Caliendo had a terrible game. It was just tough. That affected everything they did and how they called their offense. They shrunk everything down. The fact that they made it to the Super Bowl is a testament to how good the defense was, how good Mahomes is in key moments. But now it's okay. You got a guy in here who's at least an average left tackle, hopefully a little above average or more. You've got, Kingsley playing left guard instead of left tackle. I think the ways in which he was losing at left tackle don't necessarily apply at left guard. But now you've got this 3 wide receiver room. You've got this whole plan. Let's see something more dynamic here. Knowing that Travis Kelce is not your centerpiece guy week in and week out, or even usually in this kind of last dance year.
If you guys are enjoying Seth's content in today's video, make sure to check out his Chief in the North newsletter on Substack. He's been doing this for years, puts out 2 to 3 articles a week on average with insightful takes and film reviews on newly signed players, draft picks, and so much more. Just click the link in the description or pinned comment and you can get a yearly subscription for just $12. Yes, that's just $1 a month because at the end of the day, Seth really hates money. Flipping to the other side of the ball, they've added a couple different pieces. Let's just start closest to the football and just kind of move back. So D-line, I feel like they just kind of ran it back with a lot of similar guys. Obviously, Turk Wharton, they were not going to pay $3-year, $54 million contract to, but like super happy for him from a UDFA to like absolutely incredible. Not going to pay him that. But you've still got a lot of the same guys on the D-line. You did add in Tillery. You've got Mike Pennell back. I think you probably, actually, this is the position group I'm most confident they're going to add 1 to 2 players on, whether it's defensive ends or defensive tackles, maybe even one of each in the draft. I feel like that's coming. That's going to happen because of how deep this draft class is. But how are you feeling about the D-line? From there, we'll kind of go to Nick Bolton and just thoughts on real quick, his deal before we just hit secondary.
I feel better about the defensive line than I did this time last year. I know a lot of people are kind of viewing Turk Wharton, who I'm thrilled for, had a good contract year. But when you look at the line right now, as opposed to line heading into last year right now, with Amenahu now a year removed from the ACL surgery, and he was still solid last year, but he wasn't as good as he was in 23. One of the things that makes Amenahu such a tough guy to block, he's got tremendous length and power for a guy who lines up primarily as an edge. But he's also got a little bit of explosion to him. And that allows him to get to half a man, allows him to actually threaten the edge legitimately to set up some of his power-based moves. And last year, he just didn't have that. And again, no one reasonable would have expected that from him. He tore his ACL at the very end of January or in early February. The fact that he played it all last year, kudos to him, and that the film wasn't bad. They got him for a steal. He's a good to close to very good defensive end. You got him at up to $7 million. That's a steal. So you're better there than you were last year, even though it's the same name. Karlaftis has gotten a little bit better every year. We'll see how that goes. The big question will be with Tillery versus Wharton. Here's what I would tell Chiefs fans to think about. Before Wharton got signed to such a big deal, how would you have compared a Jerry Tillery to him? Because once guys get paid, it tends to alter the way people see them. Tillery has always been very talented. That's why he was drafted in the first round. Terrific length, good size, good athleticism, good functional strength. what I'm trying to tell people, and I did do a full review on him on the Chief of the North newsletter, where I kind of wrote about his strengths and weaknesses. As a pass rusher, I actually think in terms of being able to win one-on-one matchups, I think he could potentially be an upgrade over Wharton. He didn't get a ton of those matchups in Flores' system in Minnesota because he was often not just a 34 defensive end, but he really was lined up kind of 5 tech or even, to where he's, right opposite of the tackle, a little more outside than he's comfortable with. He's at his best threatening one of the A gaps or maybe the outside shoulder of the guard. Something that makes him dangerous as a pass rusher to an extent, not consistent, but dangerous, is that he can threaten both the outside and inside shoulder of the guard because he's got enough athleticism to do it. He's also got a couple of go-to pass rush moves that are pretty refined. His film, in my opinion, you compare his film to Turk's last year, I think his pass rush film is a little bit better. He's not consistent. That's a problem. Throughout his career, it's kind of followed him around that maybe effort runs a little hot and cold. Some of that you could see on his film with Minnesota, but you could also see when he's being asked to be kind of the setup guy. Flores blitzes constantly, right?
Yeah.
There's just constant blitzes, constant stunts, and he's kind of the setup guy, and you can see the effort run hot and cold there. So I actually feel very good about the defensive line. I fully expect them unless there's like a run on defensive tackles or like someone that they never expected to fall to them comes to 31. I fully expect them to grab one of these defensive tackles in the first round.
No, I agree with you. It's such a deep draft class, and there's a couple guys that I would really like, and this isn't the conversation to really talk draft crushes or anything like that, but anybody that watches my videos knows some of the guys I've really been talking about, Walter Nolan being one of my favorites, but I sometimes wonder, like, Turk Wharton had a career year, but he also took advantage of the fact that Chris Jones is an absolute problem. And that's great. Yep. And that's not a knock to Turk. He made the most of his opportunities. And that's what I hope with Tillery and whoever the Chiefs end up drafting. Just please make the most of your opportunities when Chris Jones is getting doubled and tripled, or just all the attentions, they're just lost on him. And that's when a Minihue could kick inside and do some things too that I'm super excited about as well. What are your thoughts about I was a little surprised, although it makes all the sense in the world. This is older news, so we don't have to spend very long on it. But Nick Bolton, 3 years, 45, I think 30 guaranteed, so maybe an out after a couple. But he's kind of the brains of the defense in the sense of the middle linebacker, and Spags loves the guy to death. I mean, Nick Bolton said during his presser with the media last week, I got a dad call as soon as the deal went down, and I've talked with Spags already multiple times. And they were like, multiple times? What did you, like, all about football? He didn't really go into it. But Spags loves Nick Bolton. Thoughts on that and having him around for a couple more years at his price point?
Bolton helps the defense execute some of the more complicated things that Spags wants them to do. I acknowledge that. A lot of the things that he does well are things that we don't necessarily see. He's also going to have snaps where he's clearly physically out of his depth. You are going to see multiple times next year and every year him getting beaten out of the backfield. There's going to be some running back running to the flat. They're going to try to arrive at the same time, and he's going to get left in the dust. This is the guy, and this is what I always say, and I kind of say it with a bit of a joke, but this is the guy that lost a foot race against Brock Purdy to the sideline. That's who he is. He has those very real physical limitations that he in part makes up for by being an incredibly smart player who helps them do a bunch of things. I think the writing was on the wall when they decided not to bring back Justin Reed. I think with Spags, with everything Spags loves to do, I think losing both of them would have been tough. Justin Reed's played a larger role in this defense than a lot of people realize. And so if had it been me, I would have brought back Justin Reed for the price point he was at, and I would have done something different with the linebacker position. But I get where they went with it. It's more than I would have spent. Again, it's one of those moves that I get, but I don't really love. But it allows the linebacker room to not necessarily be a glaring weakness, and it allows you to keep running the defense the way you want to. And if you're going to replace either Bolton or Reed, of the two of them, one of them has an in-house replacement. Drew Tranquil is an obvious Mike replacement to me, but for one reason or another, Spags doesn't like him there. And honestly, I think had Tranquil played as well in 2024 as he did in 2023, this might have gone differently. But he didn't play as well. And I would also say everything I've heard is that they love Jaden Hicks. Love him. And he was known for being an incredibly cerebral player in college. He played well when he got his opportunities last year. I think their plan is to bring Hicks into that Justin Reed role. And so because they were so confident and comfortable with him, then it becomes a little bit of an easier decision, as much as you maybe don't like it. So, that's just kind of how it goes sometimes. I get that sometimes you're paying a guy for what they provide other than just what I can see on film.
Yeah, and he's got his bright spots, which we all know. Like against the run, that guy is an absolute problem, and I love having him there. But the deficiencies in coverage show up and are a frustrating factor. Hopefully some of that can be mitigated by getting Chamari Connor out of the slot. Do you think the signing of Christian Fulton could be a sign of things to come for the Chiefs secondary next year? Justin Reed and Jaden Hicks, you kind of already hit on, which is like, makes sense. He was the best safety in the last year's draft class, talking about Jaden Hicks. So if you're going to have a guy replace Justin Reed, save money there to spend it elsewhere, like I kind of get that. But for the main issue with me, or most Chiefs fans watching the defense last year, was middle of the field. So if Nick Bolton has his deficiencies there, you can't also have the slot corner also have big deficiencies there. Do you think that Christian Fulton helps potentially fix that issue via some scrambling of players? All right, real quick, I want to shout out a couple ways you can support the channel. You can get some HBTC coffee of Benchwarmer Brew. This has got origin notes of Mexico and Ethiopia, a smooth medium roast, and it is one of the most popular blends of the lineup. Then you can also snag some HBTC merch. We've got Dad Bod Season, X Factor in honor of Dante Hall, mixed with Xavier Worthy, of course, and much more. Links to both the coffee and merch are in the description down below.
I think Christian Fulton is potentially, through the domino effect, the most important signing on the defense in the offseason. Maybe bringing back Amenahu, that was a big deal. Because them bringing back Big Mike, them bringing back Amenahu, awesome moves. Love both of them because they needed a nose tackle. They needed another pass rusher, another good defensive lineman. The thing with Christian Fulton, I think if I were to blurb it for someone, what if someone were to try to ask, okay, what does he bring to the table? He's extremely physical, and you can always scroll through. You can show whatever plays you want. He's not afraid to go up and compete against bigger receivers for the ball. This is one of my favorite clips. If you go down, there was one in particular that I really, really loved. He's able to anticipate and compete at the catch point, and that's something that he does with some consistency. He understands right here. You see him passing off a receiver and then coming in. You see the running backs trying to, get into the flat. The idea is that he's going to be drawn out of position. Smart zone coverage defender. That's a necessity with Spags. And that's something that he does significantly better than Josh Williams, Najee Johnson, some of the guys that had problems last year. Josh Williams, really physically talented. Spags has never trusted him. We've seen that time after time after time. And last year, the second corner position when Watson was hurt, and then the third corner position being such a problem for the defense, it created a weak spot, something you could attack. And then it kept, as you alluded to, Trent McDuffie out of the slot, which then they tried to do like the big slot thing with Chamari Connor, and then he'd get isolated on slot receivers, and it went badly. They tried Gardner Johnson, or not Gardner Johnson. They tried
Roland Wallace. I wish it was Gardner Johnson.
Yeah, Gardner Johnson probably would have gone better. Although he's not really like a slot corner either. But yeah, they tried Roland Wallace, who I kind of like his film. I'm intrigued by him. But they didn't trust him to do everything. They didn't trust Taylor to do everything. They didn't trust Johnson to do everything. And Johnson was the one they kept giving chances to, and he just struggled. I'm curious what he looks like another year removed from his own injury. But here's the big thing. Christian Fulton has been almost exclusively a boundary guy. He's not an incredible athlete. He's got okay long speed, doesn't accelerate super well, but he's tough. He can test well at the catch point. He can be really annoying and sticky in press man when he can keep a hand on someone. Doesn't have great change of direction, which affects him from the slot, but he plays really physical. He anticipates and reads routes really well, plays really good zone coverage, really smart zone coverage. Oh, and he also plays the run really well, tackles really well. So that keeps, with him, McDuffie, and Watson, I think you've got the best tackling trio in the NFL. That's a huge deal. It was a huge part of their identity in 2023 was that wide receiver screens aren't going to work. These tunnel screens aren't going to work. If you try to get your runner to the edge and make our corners tackle, guess what? They will. Fulton can be a part of that. And then most importantly, it can kick Trent McDuffie inside on like those 65, 70% of the snaps. Yes. No, I was so happy they went out of their way to get a competent corner. So if I were to not necessarily play style, somewhat play style, but not entirely, but skill level. Imagine if they just signed another Jalen Watson, a competent, above average corner who can play man decently, can play zone decently, tackles well. You play those two guys on the boundary. You move Trent McDuffie to the slot where he is the best defender in the NFL in the slot. That allows you to have a domino effect here on the entire defense. So I'm psyched about it. I think that is going to help them tremendously. One big reason the pass rush looked worse in 2024 than 2023. Part of it was Omena who just wasn't moving as well. That was part of it. But the other part is the coverage wasn't as good by the corners. And you've got the potential to do some of that. Not all. You're not going to replace the elite play that L'Jarius Sneed had in 2023. But you can get a lot closer with 3 competent corners, one of them being a superstar.
Yeah, and then Jalen Watson, just like several other guys on the team last year, big injury, came back, wasn't necessarily quite 100%. I mean, he was cleared enough to go out there and play, but he'll be another year removed from his injury as well. And I definitely love that about the secondary and just what I was hoping you would get to that. And I love the idea of McDuffie being able to play inside more. Obviously, they can move him wherever, but if he can play inside more on key downs, especially, or on key matchups, because that's what opposing offenses were trying to do last year. Hey, let's get some guy over here with either Najee Johnson or whoever, or against Jamari Conner in the slot. There's your matchup. Doesn't really matter what you see, just throw it. Throw it to one of those two receivers.
Well, teams could match up hunt. And that was a problem the Chiefs defense had in 2024. They did in 2023. That was the difference between being a good to very good defense, which they were, versus an elite defense that they were in 2023. So the pieces are there for them to be an elite defense again in 2025, which would be huge. A lot's going to depend on how Hicks does, Amenahu's recovery, Tillery, I mean, there's ups and downs here, but Fulton has long been a competent corner. And so I really, that's the signing I'm most excited about because it allows you to utilize McDuffie as a weapon all over the place. And then you're dictating the terms to the offense, not the other way around.
And none of these signings were insane. They were all pretty creative, cost-controlled, even Fulton, Jalen Moore. Like, I understand they're not always the top of the free agency class, and maybe that could have played a role with why Nick Bolton was brought back. If you look at most of the top linebackers set to be pending free agents, they basically were all re-signed.
Absolutely.
I try not to be a homer, but I am a Chiefs fan. I like the moves that they've made. I think now it's just like, okay, can we hit a few really solid picks in the draft? Because I think that is really going to help. If the Chiefs came out of the draft with a solid 3-4 positions, where would you ideally like them to get those guys both sides of the ball? If you had to pick 3 or 4, you're like, hey, these are going to be impactful guys in some degree, some capacity in 2025, their rookie year.
For me, the only way I would want them to go offensive line in the first round is if someone falls unexpectedly to where they maybe replace Jawan Taylor in 2026, or there may be a long-term solution elsewhere. For me, defensive tackle, defensive end, those are huge. And then wide receiver and running back. So really all the positions we've talked about, the ones the defensive tackle, wide receiver, running back, those are the areas that I think you've got to build out stuff long-term. They are going to need to grab a couple corners, see what they can start to build. You're always going to be shuffling through that because the defense, you've had some re-signings, but that 2022 draft that's been so foundational, you're getting to the last year of some of those rookie deals. And so you're going to have to start to kind of reset in that capacity. But I want to see a wide receiver. I want to see especially a defensive tackle. That would be my biggest thing. A guy that could come in and maybe be strong. And I like the guy out of Oregon. I've liked his film a little bit. I like that you can line him up as a nose a little, but also get a little pass rush juice. But I want to see an explosive running back. I want to see another wide receiver added to the mix every year, and a defensive tackle especially.
How about those Chiefs?